Thank you, Ambassador Hussain. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. I wouldn't have thought it is possible to present the story of 70 years in such elegant terms, in such a short period of time with such clarity. I'm still trying to absorb all the complex formulations and the interlinkages that you talked about. So before I open the floor, maybe all of you can think of some specific and sharp questions. I had two specific questions at the outset. I think you rightly focused on Afghanistan because at least since 1979, for 40 years, it's been the dominant motor that what happened in Soviet invasion, its consequences, 9/11, its consequences, and now the next steps in Afghanistan. So it's really been the principal motor of the US-Pakistan relations for the last 40 years. But I wondered, I mean, that actually if you go back to 2001, it was a mistake, I think, to believe that there is actually convergence of interest. That given that Pakistan's issues or concerns about Afghanistan predate, and it goes back to the partition and 1947, when Pakistan inherited the western borderlands with Afghanistan. Till then, Afghanistan was a weak protectorate of the British Raj, while now it is Pakistan which inherited those borders, and that Pakistan, being a much smaller entity than the Raj, with none of the power of the Raj, to actually construct a different relationship. You recall Afghanistan was the only country that opposed the entry of Pakistan into the UN. They don't recognize the Durand Line. What they said, we can accept it with the British, but we're not going to accept it with Pakistan. So there was an inbuilt problem there with the inheritance and Pakistan's ability to maintain. That Pakistan clearly needed a friendly government, one that it, much like the British-Kabul relationship, where the British interests are satisfied similarly. But the problem is Pakistan never had the power to enforce a particular outcome in Afghanistan, even though when you had a free hand. So given that past, where do we think we go in the future? Because you pointed out all the possibilities, but if we know anything in the last 10 years, certainly with the Americans, at every point what they say is the policy actually is unraveled by the unintended consequences. The idea that, look, you can build a democracy, you can build a new country, that unraveled. When Obama says, look, I will withdraw, but I will train them and they can handle it, that doesn't work. Now, Trump, for all he might say, I'll stay back, I'll do something, it could end in a whimper. It doesn't end in a clarity that, look, here is a great power, they've worked it out, the strategy, and the outcomes have been fixed. But we don't know. So now, if things end up in chaos, you used a very interesting phrase, which is the reverse strategic depth. That you talk to, normally everyone talks about Pakistan, armies search for strategic depth in Afghanistan. But Taliban already has strategic depth because of the ethnic overlay. So what does that do to Pakistan's interest in how it can pursue long-term relationship with Afghanistan? That is, the war has already moved into Pakistan's territory, and the Durand Line is, some would say it's a fiction, others would say, look, you're trying to fence it. So the Pashtun overlay, how does that play out? What happens to the Pashtun question? That is one question. The second is, the external has always had an impact on the internal in Pakistan. So if the chaos continues on the western borderlands, what does it do to Pakistan's internal dynamics? So these are the...
Thank you. It's a very insightful observation and tough questions. The United States has several problems in making public policy, especially when it comes to going to wars. Not since the Second World War it has won any war, it has failed in all the wars. And the reason is it enters war thoughtlessly and exits wars thoughtlessly. Because the wars are pursued not entirely on military considerations or strategic considerations. There a lot goes into it, and most of it, the emotional issues, the politics of it, and the issue that we are superpower, we have to act. So in the same manner, they went to Afghanistan without giving any thought to the situation in Afghanistan, especially as to what had been going on previously. If they had focused on what had been going on in the region, they would have figured out that this is not the way to solve Afghanistan's problem. Afghanistan had serious state building, nation building challenges which had not resolved for 2 centuries, and it needed to be rebuilt not through military ways but through political means. Of course, military could be a component of that. It misunderstood the Afghanistan challenge just as it misunderstood the Iraq challenge. It made the same mistakes in both the countries. Mistake in Iraq was there was a certain existing balance of power. It shattered that balance of power. And those who were disinherited, they reacted. Mistake in Afghanistan was there was an existing balance of power. It shattered that balance of power. And those who were disinherited, they reacted and used Taliban as a kind of an instrument. In both places, America thought there's only one challenge. What was the challenge in Iraq? Saddam Hussein. Once Saddam Hussein is gone, all the problems will be resolved. Not true. What was the problem in Afghanistan? Taliban. Once the Taliban is gone, all the problems will be solved. Not true. Afghanistan's problems went beyond Taliban. Iraq's problems went beyond Saddam Hussein. That is what happened. Initially, I was I was still in the government at that time, so I could tell you how I knew the Pakistan policy at that time. Pakistanis were not so wedded to the Taliban. Taliban lost power, and Musharraf and others really, honestly bet on success, American success in Afghanistan. They thought if America could somehow succeed in stabilizing Afghanistan, maybe a government could emerge with whom they could work. Pakistan's reversion to supporting Taliban emerged only after when Pakistan started American failure in Afghanistan. So it's not that Taliban are the only instrument of Pakistan's for realization of Pakistan's objectives in Afghanistan. Pakistan had no option. Now the question how it would affect the future, the Pashtun areas, Pakistan's strategic interests. I can give you my own personal views, and they are a kind of a minority view. My own view is the most important element is if Pakistan and Kabul could cooperate. Because they have serious, Pakistan and Afghanistan have very serious issues to which you alluded, and these are centuries old issues. You have the boundary issues, you have the ethnic issues. The two countries have had break of diplomatic relations. They have attacked each other's missions. They have harbored each other's dissidents. They have harbored each other's terrorists. They have brought harm to each other. It's not just strategic depth. It's a question of finding a way to live in peace and with each other, which they have not found because of historical reasons, because of the ethnic issues and all that. Kabul is completely in disarray. If it can get its act together, it can cooperate. I don't see that coming. So the net result is a conflict, a bad conflict. I only hope that Pakistan also emerges with some strategy that this conflict, Pakistan doesn't make use of this conflict to overreach like it did in the 90s. In the 90s, it overreached. The field was clear to it. They thought the Taliban was a good opportunity to set up a compliant government in Kabul. But if Pakistan tries to do the same, I hope Pakistan has learnt its lessons. So if Pakistan manages the conflict in a way, in cooperation with other United States as well and Kabul, perhaps they can manage the conflict and avoid sort of very serious damages. The second question was
on the domestic, the consequence of domestic politics of Pakistan.
domestic politics. Unfortunately, there's too much politics in Pakistan. So I don't think the politicians will sort of cooperate with the government on these. They will find any opportunity to embarrass the government. Even on Kashmir, if you should have read, you have seen Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech in the parliament and the way the opposition was embarrassing him. So he had to say in agitation, what do you want me to do? You want me to go to war with India? You know. So opposition will try to create problems. But I hope Pakistan's problem is, in my view, either it has suffered from democracy deficit or it has suffered from democracy excess. So there is it has to find some way of a controlled democracy, not in the sense that you have as generally taken to be as a military dominated, but I think,
Moderation.
you need a moderation.
Yeah, Dr. Chaudhary.
Thank you. Touqir, congratulations, I think, as Professor Raja Mohan was saying, encapsulating sort of 70 years into 30 minutes, where you did a tremendous job. A question, I mean, some of these we have discussed, of course, in the corridors and the rooms. Question, you see, Pakistan's, let me go back to the original title, the US-Pakistan Relations. Pakistan will always have interest in the United States. The question is how the reverse interest can be generated. Earlier on, during the Cold War, the idea was America needed Pakistan as a bastion of anti-Soviet arrangements, CENTO, C2, etc. That was a good alliance for Pakistan. Also, building these linkages met the power gap with India. So that was in Pakistan's benefit. On the other hand, of course, America needed Pakistan. America also needed Pakistan as a conduit for China. This was later on in the late 60s and early 70s, and Pakistan was very crucial in developing these linkages. Thirdly was Afghanistan, I mean, since the Soviet occupation, etc. So Afghanistan was something that created American stakes in Pakistan. Post-Afghanistan, now what, in your view, would be the interest of America, or the stakes of America in Pakistan? Pakistan would need a critical, I mean, you have, of course, focused on strategic issues. Pakistan will need a strategic linchpin in order to connect with America, or rather to have America connect with Pakistan. So what will be that in your view? Thank you.
I think Pakistan-US relationship is no longer being defined by one issue. It's if we are going back in history and talking of opening to China, and before that the Cold War and the role that Pakistan played, those were kind of single issue factors which helped US-Pakistan relations. The world has gone beyond that, and Pakistan itself is not the same as it was. United States' own policies are not the same as they were. Now there is a kind of a dispersal of many issues which connect the United States with Pakistan, some negatively, some positively. So if you are talking of whether the United States can come up with a coherent design how to deal with Pakistan and which factors to be sort of given preference over the others, and how to move the
so there's a risk that Pakistan can be marginalized. That's the point. See, they may have nothing in common.
I don't think Pakistan can be marginalized. No, I mean the point is, if Pakistan cannot be of much help to the United States, Pakistan has the capacity to give harm also.
Trouble.
Trouble.
Negative.
So I don't think Pakistan can be marginalized. So the United States has faced the dilemma of dealing with the negative aspects of Pakistan, and has found that the pressure alone doesn't work. So in order to deal with Pakistan, you have to come back to giving some incentive as well. That is where people like Zalmay Khalilzad, who know the region very well, they succeeded. Previously, only pressure, pressure, pressure. He said, no, you give them an incentive also. Give them an incentive of an improved relationship with the United States, which will be in your interest as well. You don't have to have a great strategic relationship, but at least a workable, decent relationship in which both sides know the strengths and weaknesses and also the benefits and harms that they can give to each other. So I don't think Pakistan is to be
I think one of the central features of Pakistan has been its location.
Yes.
Any business,
Yeah.
you say location, location, location.
Yeah, location.
And the strategic location of Pakistan at the crossroads of South Asia, West Asia, Central Asia, next to China in the old days with Soviet Union. That I don't think is going to disappear. I think the question is whether it can be positive leverage or a negative leverage rather. Dr. Mustafa?
Thank you very much, Professor Hussain, for a very insightful and erudite presentation. I learned a lot from your sharing.
Thank you.
Got a couple of questions. I think the first one, could you shed a little bit on the people-to-people linkages in US, people-to-people linkages, exchanges, student youth exchanges in US-Pakistan relations? Could we say a little bit on that?
No, I didn't follow that.
No, the people-to-people linkages.
People-to-people.
People, okay,
linkages.
all right, okay.
And the second is to do with the fact that if I could seek your diplomatic wisdom on Pakistan's foreign policy, do they have a sort of strategy towards Southeast Asia since we are in this region? What sort of engagement do you see in this current Imran Khan's administration?
Go back to Seattle.
What do you mean?
Pakistan was once part of a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization.
That was because of East Pakistan.
That is.
I will address your first question, and second I will refer to the High Commissioner here. She has two advantages. She's still in the government, and secondly, she's dealing with the issues. Listen, people-to-people contacts are very good, especially from the Pakistani side. You have Pakistanis, regardless of what they may think about America, are impressed with America's achievements, are impressed with American values, are impressed with what America could do. We should not be sort of swayed by this anti-Americanism. Pakistani anti-Americanism is of a very different kind. It's not so much a kind of a dislike or animosity or animus towards America. It's more of a kind of an expression of grudge against America. It's not so much an anger, but a grudge. That look, we did so much for you. What have you done? Pakistan sends a lot of students to America. I think every year almost 100 students go to Ivy League universities. Whatever little I have heard, Pakistani businessmen love to do business with America. America is their leading business partner.
Diaspora.
The diaspora is very, very active, and many of them are now politically active as well in Pakistan. So there are no constraints on Pakistanis, or for that matter Americans, to develop the relations. The only problem from the American side is not so much political, but questions like travel advisory, or Pakistan's investment policies, or Pakistan's climate to do business, or the security situation, or the consistency of its economic policies, or prospects of any political instability and all that. These are the issues which, otherwise, if you deep down, Americans still consider Pakistan as a friend, and Pakistanis still consider America as a friend. As the second question, I would ask the High Commissioner.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem, but could you please repeat your question?
No, I was just saying, is there a strategy towards
Southeast
Is there
Asia.
a strategy or Pakistan's strategy in engaging Southeast Asia in the current Imran Khan's administration?
We started our journey of look east, long after India started its policy of look east. We were late, but I think we have covered a lot of distance as far as Far East, East Asia and all this is concerned. in 2003, we started our journey, and we opened a lot of missions in Far East. Like, we did not have a mission in Cambodia, in Vietnam, in Myanmar. All these new missions were opened. We joined many new regional groupings in this part of the world. We became members of SM and ARF. So I think this is what you wanted to know. Am I on the point?
Yeah.
So we have covered a lot of distance, and we are working to further improve our relations, political, economic, and business relations with the countries of this region. Singapore is a very important member of ASEAN. We are trying to achieve the dialogue partner status with ASEAN. So this is an ongoing effort. It's an ongoing process. So we are hopeful that we will be able to achieve much more than we have been able to achieve so far.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for stepping
Thank
in
you.
so gracefully. Dr. Iqbal?
My voice is loud.
No, use the recording.
Your voice is hearing everything.
Professor, thank you for the brilliant talk. I had two very brief questions. One was with regards to the extension of General Bajwa. It's the second time this has happened. I'm curious about, let me rephrase it, I'm curious, given the multiple engagements that Pakistan is involved in now, Afghanistan, India, US relations, etc., how much can we read into this Bajwa's extension with regards to the role he's playing, or the military is playing as well? And the other question, very briefly, is there serious belief that Trump can play some sort of role in negotiating? Is this just for the media, or is there some serious thought to this?
Okay, I will try to answer both. The extension of Bajwa is not such a big surprise. Kiani got similar extension because the height of war on terrorism. And at this particular time, Bajwa had been playing a very important role in the Afghanistan peace process. That's why he went to Washington. And whatever little I have heard, he had very good talks in the Pentagon, very, very good talks. In fact, much of what Pakistan can do for the United States and for the improvement of the United States-Pakistan relations and for bringing the Taliban to the negotiation lies in the domain of the army. It's not really a civilian issue. So they are the ones who deal with Taliban. They are the ones who know the ground situation. They are the ones who, what kind of pressures can be put on the Taliban. They know the border situation. So as an army chief who has been involved in the process for some time, I think he's knowledgeable, his understanding is very good, and most importantly, he seems to have developed good understanding with the Americans as well. So that was one part of it. Secondly, the crisis that Mr. Modi has created, that also raises the prospect of a conflict. So in order to have rather than have a new chief, it's better to deal with someone who is already in place and who have had experience of a previous conflict, most recently in February. So I think that is another issue. And third, most Pakistani prime ministers are always concerned as to how they personally get along with Bajwa. Apparently, Imran Khan gets along well with Bajwa, whatever I have known. So all these considerations, Afghanistan, India, personal relationship, I think made it very natural for him to give the extension. About the second question.
Do you take Trump seriously?
Well, yeah. Trump is a fascinating phenomenon. I tell you, I've loved watching him, loved trying to understand. And my advice to all of you, if I couldn't be of any help, don't read foreign policy meanings into what he says. Believe me, I mean, I think we make mistake when we start analyzing his tweets, when we start analyzing his from the policy perspective. The only perspective that you should see it from are the politics, his relationship with the base, relationship with the Republican Party. On policy, he is very thin. Let me go back to, in answer to your question, go back to what happened during Imran Khan's visit when he made that announcement that he is very. My own sort of guess, and also backed up by some information that I've got, that apparently Zalmay Khalilzad suggested to the State Department and to the White House that you should try to sort of praise Imran Khan, you should try to praise Pakistan. South Asians love flattery, and he will
always works.
Yeah, so he will be, and it will build up his image in Pakistan. It will boost his image in America also. So they put him maybe one small line in the brief, one small line, and probably that's the only line he read. So in the brief, and he does it very well. I mean, so he just ran away with it, to be very honest. I mean, and he put things in it which the State Department had not even put. I'm sure State Department had not pushed Kashmir into it, because the next day they disowned that statement. So he said, let me flatter him as much as I can, because I need help from him in helping us extricate from. So he even used the words which go beyond sort of mediation and all that. Having said that, it's always for the State Department now to clean up after him. So they have to come up with some policy the next day, and they immediately started coming up with some policy which is not in conflict with what he has said, but at the same time, yeah, exactly, State Department. So they said it very nicely. I mean, I've been seeing statements. He said, yes, we would like to play some role, but Pakistanis have to first create an atmosphere conducive to talks with India, and that's before August 5. So when the correspondents asked, what is that? You take action against the jihadists. Once you have done that, then you come back to us and we will see what we can do. The State Department salvaged that position by putting it in that context. Now, second thing you should sort of notice in his tweets is, in order to understand, he likes to appear to his base as a great statesman. The other powers look up to him for arbitration, mediation, diplomatic maneuvers, and that anyone who was a threat before has now become a friend. Like, remember, he keeps talking of Kim and North Korea, that he was out to go to war with the United States, but now he's become a friend. He keeps saying that when I receive love letters from him. So, I mean, no foreign policy expert would pay any importance to him, and they should not. But his base loves it. They will clap, yeah, it's true. This man saved us from destruction and Holocaust and the war. I mean, but for him, we would have been facing war. So that is what he does. So he makes a statement about Kashmir, telling his base, you see how big a statesman I am. Modi asked me to mediate, Imran Khan is asking me to mediate, and I can play a great role. So much for that. Now, what has happened after August 5 has created tensions between Pakistan and the United States. So, Pakistanis are calling upon Trump to stand up and be counted. He said, you made the statement. So he said, all right. So he has been on the telephone with Imran. Apparently three calls have been made. So he is trying to sort of assure, purely for the purpose of keeping the Pakistanis' goodwill, that, as if but when he actually talks to Modi, he probably talks of
trade deals.
Exactly, yeah, other thing. So he is trying to ride two horses in that way, essentially trying to deal with question of de-escalation of tensions, but in the Pakistani context to make them believe it's about Kashmir, which actually it is not. So the bottom line, to answer your question, I don't think he can play any role in that.
Professor Ren is also visiting us. He's from China Foreign Affairs University, so it's China's everywhere and the most important perspective. So,
thank you, Professor Mohan. I think first of all, I would like to congratulate Ambassador Hussain for your excellent presentation, and also I'm very looking forward to your South Asian scan.
Yes,
actually,
I'm working on that.
It's only a part of your final
yes.
report, but it's still very fascinating for me to get a very profound understanding of the U.S.-Pakistan relations from history to the present and to the future. I have two very brief questions concerning your remarks. First, I think I would like to ask you about your perception of the future strategic framework of the bilateral relationship between the United States and Pakistan, because in your presentation you mentioned many times that convergence and divergence exist at the same time. That's the root cause of the up and downs of the bilateral relationship, and there are no stable strategic framework until now, to try to make the bilateral relations come stable and foreseeable. Therefore, what will be your understanding of the strategic framework between United States and Pakistan? Since Mohan mentioned during his return to Pakistan that I want to reset the relationship and build it on the equal footing. So, what's your understanding from the Pakistan perspective, the future strategic framework? Secondly, I would like to ask you a question related to your, outlook for the future Pakistan-U.S. relations. The first driver you mentioned is strategic, political, strategic. It's about the geostrategic structure. You talk a little about China, China's role, and you believe it will be not a very decisive, factor to influence the U.S.-Pakistan relations. But as for my point of view, I think China-U.S. strategic competition just start. It will last for a very, very long time. It will go very deep and very complicated. And now, as far as I know, China is trying to adjust our South Asian policy to, attach more importance to China-India relationship. India and Japan, one on the west, one on the east, are a main, foreign policy concerns, and we have improved our relationship with those two countries quite a lot. And at the same time, we try to keep and maintain our strategic relationship, all-weather, so-called all-weather strategic relationship with Pakistan to make a balance on these two major countries in South Asia. And to what extent do you think United States will play, the Pakistan card when, the China-U.S. strategic competition deepen in the future, and does Pakistan feel a little worried about China's improving relationship with India? No. So that's my question.
Thank you. I did say that Pakistan and United States have had problem in finding strategic convergence in the past, and my own view is they will continue to have a problem. The relationship is not going to become strategic for the simple reason that now this relationship operates in a very complex environment. Even when environment was not so complex back in the 80s and early 60s, when US-Pakistan relationship stood tall in the region and other things were circling around it. Now it's facing a daunting geopolitical context, regional context, US relations with India, and a whole lot. So in other words, any prospects of strategic relationship with Pakistan runs up against US relations with India, US interests in Afghanistan, and US problems with China. So what they should aim for is a workable, friendly relationship with not huge grandiose expectations which should not be dependent on aid. I think aid is perhaps the worst way to deal with a big power. They give money and they expect you to do things for them, even that go against your interest. That has been the worst part of the US-Pakistan relationship. America thinks just because it gives money, it can ask other countries to do things which go against their interests. Or the concept in America is you can buy friendships. You cannot buy friendships. Other countries, if they're interested, they cannot do that. So my own view is I don't foresee the sort of emergence of a strategic relationship between the United States and Pakistan, number one. Secondly, do I see prospects of improved relations? Yes, because United States has seen both now. United States has seen an overly inflated relationship which is harmful. The United States has seen a punitive relationship which is harmful. It has to come somewhere in the middle and avoid going from one extreme to another, because that has been unfortunately the American policy, going from one extreme to another, either showering you with billions and praising you sky high, the most allied ally of the United States, or punishing you and putting you in the doghouse. There's no way of handling a relationship. United States has to find a middle way of dealing with. So my guess is probably United States will. As to your second question about how the US-China relationship will impact Pakistan and how Pakistan card will be used by the United States, hard to say for two reasons. One, in my mind, you know much better, in my mind there's still not much clarity as to how US-China tensions will evolve in the years ahead or decade ahead. I'm not very clear. You should all have a better idea. Second thing is, if the United States has important interests in Pakistan, it should use this Pakistan card against China only up to an extent that it doesn't weaken Pakistan. It would not go to the extent of, in order to harm China, it has to harm Pakistan. No, that will not be a good way of dealing with the situation. So Pakistan will probably remain a pressure point against China, but when the crunch comes, America will try to make sure that there's a limit to which the United States sort of operates its Pakistan-China policy that harms Pakistan. So they will not go to that extent. This is just my guess.
Yeah. Dr. Karthik, not here. Karthik is our new colleague. He's joined this week. So welcome and show.
Thank you. Professor Hussain, that was a great presentation. Just have a quick question. If you're looking at the future, if you would disaggregate the U.S. government, which entity there, which institution would you like to take the lead on the U.S.-Pakistan relationship? Should it be the State Department, the NSC, the DOD, Commerce? If you had a choice, who do you think should lead the sort of should drive relations forward, and how will that affect what will happen? Thanks.
Good question. Let me tell you how I have seen the relationship. Both during the early part, first alliance in the Cold War and secondly in the 80s, relationship with Pakistan was of course not strategically, I mean it was important because dealing with strategic issues, but more important than that, it had a certain political dimension in American domestic politics. I have seen when an issue becomes politically very important to the American electorate, it's not the State Department, not the Pentagon will make the policy, White House makes the policy. So in both, during time, even though Pakistan was not a big country, Pakistan was even strategically not so important, but the policy was driven by the White House. You had personal relationship between Kennedy and Ayub Khan, Eisenhower and the Pakistani leaders, Lyndon Johnson, which you don't find and during 80s, Reagan and Ziaul Haq. So its policy was driven by the White House because politically these issues are very important. The Cold War, the end of the evil empire and all that. Now we are at a stage where Pakistan's importance is not around an area which is so vital strategically, and as far as politics of the issue is concerned, it impacts Pakistan negatively. It used to affect Pakistan positively, now it affects negatively. So policy this time for Pakistan will be made by all these entities that you have mentioned. A single entity is relevant only when when the basis of relationship is extraordinary, for example, jihad in 80s, or before that when you needed Pakistan as a strong ally. But when that importance is missing, then you have all these institutions, Pentagon, State Department, State Commerce, they will all put in there, and eventually the policy that will emerge will be kind of a moderate, not so salient, but with no great strategic significance and no great political significance. So what I'm trying to say is that in normal times you have all these entities which are important. In abnormal times, the White House takes charge. I hope it answers your questions.
Someday when you say the Trade Department, the Commerce Department begins to take interest, then I think we'll be in a very... In fact, it's interesting, though there's not much trade, Trump kept talking about, we'll build a trade, because for Trump, trade is at the top of his mind, and he says, look, we must have better trade relations. But someday maybe it will happen. But before that, now we're beginning to run against the clock, so I'll just take the last two questions together. Dr. Ranajay Sen and then John. Yeah.
Thanks. Ambassador Hussain, could you say a little bit about the future strategy of Pakistan on Kashmir? Of course, Kashmir came up a couple of times in your talk. Currently, it seems that the effort to internationalize the issue hasn't really worked, in the sense, except for China. None of the great powers most of them have come out saying it's an internal issue. Of course, things could change in the future, but as of now, that seems to be the stand. And do you see in future, once the sort of security cover over Jammu and Kashmir, or the Indian administered part of Kashmir, is taken out, do you see a rise in sort of incidents involving jihadi elements and the sort of old, at least the Indian government perceives the ISI strategy of the 1,000 cuts strategy?
Okay, John, we'll take John's. Yeah.
And very quickly first, I want to thank you for all of your very apt comments on U.S. foreign policy. I could hear my mom applauding in the background for all of those comments. So I have a question that has to do with Pakistan's crackdown on terrorist elements. It seems like India-Pakistan relations, to some extent, are linked to Pakistan's ability to rein in terrorism, and yet this is not necessarily an easy task. So I've always been curious about what leverage the Pakistani government has on the Taliban. What are the domestic political considerations with cracking down on money laundering, etc. And then the second question that I have has more to do with the sort of regional geopolitical context, where, as you said, the dynamics in South Asia are very multidimensional right now. And Mike Pompeo is also talking about the India relationship and the Indo-Pacific. So how does Pakistan feel about America's investment in possibly the Indo-Pacific area?
The first question is the same as yours, so I will address that, and the second question is different, so I will address later on. I'm saying this not because the High Commissioner is here. I honestly believe, and I'm telling you from good authority, ISI, Pakistan, all that, they are not using the jihadists against India. Believe me, I mean, it's very hard for people to believe, but if this policy at all, it existed in the past, is no longer the policy. It is no longer the policy for a long time. The jihadists have lost the state support. Jihadists are no longer an instrument of state policy. I'm telling you the absolute truth as I have come to know, and I strongly believe that this is the policy. Pakistan has learnt its lessons. Pakistan has burnt the fingers. But the question arises, why is Pakistan then not taking any action against them? Well, here is the reason. A lot has happened in Pakistan in the last 30 years since Islamization of Pakistan. Pakistan state may have withdrawn its support from the jihadists, but jihadists over these decades have developed their own constituency. You have an Islamizing Pakistan, which is their constituency. And then since 9/11, American wars have given jihadists another cause, because that has raised among the Muslim Islamic countries sort of resurgence of Islamic feeling and also kind of religious nationalism. So they are playing their religious nationalist card as well. And thirdly, they are running social welfare organizations and helping people with their needs where the governance has not helped Pakistan. And they are getting funding for that from outside sources, from within Pakistan. They don't need government funding. So the government's ability to control them has diminished because they don't depend on the government anymore. So it's a very, very sort of difficult issue for Pakistan. Even if, let's say, Pakistan decides to take action, it will be backlash. So Pakistan's best hope and best strategy is to make sure that to limit their funding, limit their activities as much as they can, and honestly, Pakistan is doing its very best to meet the demands of the Financial Task Force and American demand, but it's not going to be easy. When I was in Pakistan recently, and I could see how banking has become so difficult in Pakistan. I went to get my sort of some money from my account, and they said, "Oh, we don't have your biometric accounts." Yeah. So they would not even give me money, I mean, because of that. So it is very serious issue. So I said, please don't close my account. I will try to see if I can do that. So that is the challenge. Right now, it's not that the ISI is very happy that now jihadists will be unleashed. No, that will be the worst outcome of dealing with the tensions. Pakistan does not want a conflict. Certainly not with its present economic difficulties, not with the uncertainties over Afghanistan, not with the political situation in Pakistan where opposition is against the government. It's the last thing on their mind to have a conflict, and they will do their very best as the jihad. Now, that is not to say that jihadists can be controlled. Jihadists probably feel that this is their opportunity. That is where the problem arises. Because if they are now dependent on their own constituency, they have to please them. And how do they please them? Maybe by staging these incidents from time to time, God forbid. That is probably what they do from time to time. So the danger is not finished. But that's what I tell you, Pakistan government will have no hand in that danger. Kashmir or no Kashmir. So that's not the option for Pakistan. As to your second question, Pakistan is not so much worried about Indo-Pacific as such. I think Pakistan is worried essentially about such dimensions of India-Pakistan relations which affect Pakistan. That they feel that India has been emboldened by the sort of encouragement that has been given to it by the US-India relations and the India's strategic importance, that it can isolate Pakistan. Not only that, it can take punitive action against Pakistan, and nobody will about. So it's more a question of how India's rising image, how India's strategic ambition and their support by United States and all that affect their approach to Pakistan. They are worried more about that. It's not so much a question of India, China, Indo-Pacific, in my view. So Pakistan's concern is very limited.
Yeah, I think that brings us close to a very interesting afternoon. So I wanted to thank you very much. But before we close, I thought just a couple of thoughts. One, I think the US is changing. I think so. Therefore, it's not clear when we look at US relationships around the world whether the past can be a guide to the future. That if the president attacks Germany routinely, he's attacking EU, he's kind of says NATO is awful. He tells the Japanese and the Koreans he's giving them bills saying that pay more. So this is a very, very different type of administration. So whether this contestation with improved relations with India, deteriorating ones with China, all that is there. But I think fundamentally, I think the US is going to downsize its global role to some extent. We don't know how much, how little, but I think it is not going to be the same US. So therefore, that factor has to be taken into account when we look to the future of the US-Pakistan relationship. While there is a sense of, in your presentation that Pakistan's relative significance has declined, but because of but I believe that its location, as we discussed, it is today one of the largest countries in the world. I don't know, fourth or third or fifth in terms of the population today. Sixth, 200 million plus, nuclear weapons. It has got one of the oldest armies, which is one of the most professional armies. So I don't think Pakistan's significance is going to go down. Therefore, the question then that brings us: how does Pakistan take advantage of its geography? There, I think what you mentioned. There are problems on the Pakistan's western front in Iran, Gulf. Enormous turbulence in Afghanistan could enter a more tumultuous phase where we talked about the war has already moved into Pakistan's side. And then you have India where the problems are as bad or is going to get worse on the face of it. So the strategic question, I'm not talking it as a recommendation, but purely from if I were a Pakistani, that is there room for me to win peace with one of your neighbors? Because you had a great time, US and China were on the same side, you could benefit from it, that problem too is going to come. So if we have three sets of conflicts, is there a strategic way of that even you don't have to love the Indians, say, look, temporary, tactical even or a strategic freeze in one conflict so that you are better placed to deal with it. Because in the end, strategy is about defining hierarchy of priorities. What do you do first? Which devil would you fight? Therefore, can you fight on all fronts? At a time of economic vulnerability, that is the big question. But I think at some point, I would say unlike India, probably Pakistan has been less ideological in the past. It could establish relationships with China when China and the US had no relationship. When actually Pakistan was part of the anti-communist alliances, but Pakistan found the flexibility to actually cut a deal with the Chinese at the height of US-China tensions. So I would think at some point Pakistan will have to make some strategic choices of where does this path lead to? Is there a room for doing a deal on one of those? But certainly for those of us outside, I think we do not, at least as we see Pakistan's weight declining, but I think its impact on the region and beyond is going to continue. So we look forward to keeping up our engagement, our study of Pakistan ahead. But thank you very much, and please join me for what has been a wonderful and a stimulating.
Thank you.